On March 10, 1876, Thomas Watson answered the world's first telephone call and heard Alexander Graham Bell from a room away speak, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." 93 years later, in 1969, on the evening of October 29th, Charlie Klein, a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, prepared to transmit a one-word message from his computer terminal to fellow programmer Bill Duvall at the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, some 353 miles away. Klein simply wanted to send the command login. The letter L was transmitted, followed by the letter O, and then, in what could only be seen as a prophetic moment for the future of information technology, IT, the system crashed. With an hour's work, Klein and Duvall resolved the error, and at roughly 10:30 p.m. that same night, the full message of login was successfully transmitted. This was the first communication on what would evolve into the internet you and I are using right now to communicate. From that first phone call until the early 1900s, Bell's American Telegraph and Telephone Company, AT&T, had grown to have a near monopoly over American telephone service. They had invested heavily in building out their infrastructure, and by 1910 had over 5.8 million customers. In 1948, telephone adoption hit 30 million customers, roughly one telephone for every 5 Americans. In 1934, Congress passed and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, signed the Communications Act of 1934 into law. This act established the Federal Communications Commission to regulate the communications industry. With this new law, AT&T's telephone service came under Title II of the Act, which labeled them as a common carrier. Under this title, telephone service was treated similarly to commercial transportation, which is where the term common carriage originates. This meant that all customers must be treated equally. Fares and services cannot be adjusted because of the characteristics of the customer. So every AT&T customer could expect equal treatment from the operators and equal quality of their connection. Functionally, this resulted in telephone service being treated like a public utility, just like water, natural gas, and electricity. Black's Law Dictionary indeed defines a public utility as the provider of a public service such as transport, energy, telecommunications, waste disposal, or water, or any other public goods and services. The development of our internet mirrors that of the telephone in many ways. However, unlike AT&T's privately developed infrastructure, the fundamental elements of our internet were developed with our tax dollars. When Charlie Klein was sending that message back in 1969, he was working on the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, or ARPANET project, which was funded by a grant from the United States Department of Defense, the DoD. The ARPANET project would yield a number of key developments that allowed the creation of the internet, and it would function as a network's backbone for almost 2 decades. In the years following Charlie Klein's message, a number of additional networks had begun development alongside ARPANET. Researchers were working to find a way to connect the networks to each other. The problem was that each network had its own protocols for how data was transmitted. So researchers Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn at Stanford worked to solve this problem and developed the Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol, TCP/IP, in 1974. TCP/IP resolved the transmission issue and allowed multiple networks to be interconnected. And in case you didn't know, the word internet comes from interconnected network. One of the features of TCP/IP was that every packet of data sent throughout the network had equal priority as any other packet. This principle that we have come to know as net neutrality can trace its origins back to the very early days of our internet. As the internet grew, it became increasingly difficult to navigate. When you couldn't find what you were looking for, you didn't ask Jeeves, you asked Jake. Elizabeth Jake Feinler was the head of the Network Information Center, NIC, for the ARPANET project at Stanford from 1972 to 1989. Feinler led the development in 1980 of the domain name system, which is where the .com, .org, or .whatever at the end of the website you're on right now comes from. While DNS greatly improved the ease of network navigation, as the network grew, the challenge of finding what you were looking for, it still remained. The problem was you needed to know the exact address you were trying to find and the path there from where you currently were. In 1989, Tim Berners-Lee, a researcher at the Council Européen pour la Recherche Nucléaire, CERN, in Switzerland, aimed to solve this problem with the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP, which would allow users to navigate from page to page along the network. Thus was the birth of the World Wide Web and the http://www. You find at the beginning of every web page, including this one. What each of these breakthroughs share in common is twofold. They are the foundations on which the modern internet is built, and they were each developed with taxpayer investment. So at the core of the question of who owns the internet, the answer must be that it belongs collectively to we the people. It is our internet, and it belongs to no person or no corporation, but it belongs to the public at large. With the shutdown of ARPANET's successor, the National Science Foundation Network, NSFNet, in 1995, the internet was opened up to commercial traffic and private internet service providers, ISPs. In the early days of the commercial internet, the major ISP was America Online, AOL. And we used CDs like these to access internet with modems that sounded like this. During this time, the vast majority of internet traffic used existing phone lines. I still remember getting yelled at for answering the phone when someone was online, and I'd kick them off. This meant that private internet in its earliest days was regulated as a common carrier under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934. And in keeping with the development of TCP/IP, every packet of data was given equal priority. Under this regulatory scheme, the internet flourished, with new startup companies, new services, and incredible economic growth. In 1998, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, two Stanford graduate students working from their dorm room, launched a new search engine company. They entered a crowded field of competitors, but believed their PageRank algorithm was superior to any other search engine, including the giant company Yahoo, which was valued at over $30 billion at the time. Without net neutrality, Page and Brin may have had to pay an enormous fee to reach consumers at the same speed of giants like Yahoo. Being based in their dorm room, they probably wouldn't have had the cash. But because of net neutrality, that didn't happen, and that dorm room-based search engine was able to compete on an equal footing with much larger companies. Compete they did, and eventually they won out to the point that their name has become a verb. Today, you don't just search the web for something, you Google it. Dial-up internet eventually gave way to faster service provided by cable companies. This is where the regulatory conflict we are dealing with now came about. While phone service had always been considered a common carrier under Title II, cable service had not. In 2002, despite the fact that it was the very same internet customers were paying to access, the FCC decided not to regulate cable broadband under Title II. Over the following 13 years, conflicts arose between broadband providers, customers, and the FCC. Providers tested regulators with various violations of the net neutrality principles. In 2007, Comcast was cited for blocking file sharing traffic. The FCC attempted to enforce net neutrality through Title I of the Communications Act. Those principles being no blocking of lawful content, no slowing down of lawful content, and no paid prioritization, in that you can't pay to be faster than your competitors. In 2010, Comcast won a lawsuit against the FCC to overturn the open internet policy of 2005. The FCC quickly followed with a different order that Verizon sued to overturn in 2015. The FCC again followed that with the Open Internet Order of 2015, which finally brought back Title II regulation of ISPs. On Thursday, December 14, 2017, the FCC, now chaired by former Verizon Associate General Counsel Ajit Pai, will vote on an order cynically titled Restoring Internet Freedom. This order would again remove Title II protections from internet consumers and companies alike, allowing ISPs to segment the internet, slow down content they don't like, and charge companies for preferred access. This threatens the fundamental principle on which the internet was built, that all data is treated equally. This threatens our economy, the ability of small and new businesses to compete with bigger companies, and perhaps most dangerous of all, this could threaten the internet as a tool for political organizing, as large companies could seek to block or slow down content that might undermine their interests. Their interests, of course, being to make as much money as possible for their shareholders, regardless of any cost to society. So now what can we do? If you are viewing this and it's not yet December 14th, please visit www.gofccyourself.com to comment and advise the FCC to vote down this proposal. You can also call the FCC at 1-888-225-5322. Please also consider calling your members of Congress to voice opposition to this order and request that Congress take immediate action to overturn the order should it pass. If you are viewing this and the order overturning net neutrality has passed, please join our campaign to demand that Congress protect net neutrality by passing our one-page bill to save the internet. Please sign our petition at www.makethenetneutralagain.com and call your member of Congress to voice your support for this legislation. We have just 60 legislative days to force Congress to use the Congressional Review Act, CRA, to overturn the FCC's order. While we're waiting, I figure I should tell you what I really think of Chairman Ajit Pai and those who stand with him against a free and open internet. And I think